Hey, John from Stormforce Performance back with another deep dive, and this video is absolutely crucial for you if you're looking to become an all-round athlete, if you're looking to elevate your performance, and particularly if you find that you're hitting what I call glass ceilings. You're training hard, you're putting in the hours, but something's not clicking, you're not moving forward with your performance, whatever sport you're involved in. Realistically, most sports do involve working at a variety of different intensities. You're not just at a high intensity, you're not just at a low intensity. Most sports, particularly team sports, are a bit of both, going up and down and fluctuating depending on the competition. So it's vitally important you understand all of this stuff. This comes at a time where fitness has become very much about just work as hard as you can. If I just go as hard as I can for whatever's put on the whiteboard, or whatever my intervals are, then I'm going to get fitter. And obviously there is some base to that, and that will work to a point. But when you understand that training in all of these different zones develops different capacities, you're going to start to realize what you might be missing out on. So I'm going to go through what each zone is, what it actually means, why you need to train in that zone, and how we can do it. And as usual with the hows, there's a million different ways, but this will give you a sort of basic understanding to get cracking with. So first of all, we talk about the 5 different zones, and we typically understand that zone 1 is going to be the easiest, the lowest intensity of activity, and zone 5 is going to be that horrific level. I'm working as hard as I can and I cannot hold this for very long. So what percentages of your maximum heart rate does each zone cover? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you, you really need to get a metabolic test done, because I do this stuff with a lot of people now, kind of athletes as well as what I call Joe Average, and it is amazing to see how actually people's heart rate zones can differ from what is generally recommended. And the reason for that might be just general fitness levels. It's often how they've trained. So if somebody is always training in zone 4 and zone 5 because they're a go hard or go home person, then what we'll often find is that they don't have much of a zone 2. They have an earlier fat to carb crossover, and what that means is when we start at a low intensity, we're able to utilize fatty acids for fuel, and then eventually we come to this point where the body is unable to process fats to produce enough energy for what it needs. So that's when we start delving into glucose, sugars, carbohydrates, however you want to label it for now. We get that crossover point, and the higher intensity we reach, the less we are able to use fatty acids for fuel. And ultimately, that's why we're only able to do this for short distances, where when we're able to stay in a fat burning zone, then we can pretty much do that for as long as those fatty acids last. Okay, so that's a very brief way of looking at it. So, like I said, the zones can differ to what you would typically see if you just Google them on the internet, or maybe what's on your your smartwatch, your Garmin, whatever. But today we're just going to use this as a rough guide. So zone 1 is going to be roughly 50 to 60% of your max heart rate. Zone 2 about 60 to 70. Zone 3 70 to 80. Zone 4 is typically 80 to 90% of max heart rate, and obviously zone 5 is that top end, reaching your maximum heart rate, so between 90 and 100. So why would we want to train in these different zones? Why not just go as hard as we can? Well, first of all, zone 1 is not just a warm-up, it's not just because you want to do some easy exercise. It is actually very beneficial for recovery, because what it can do is increase oxygen delivery. Obviously, we're starting to do a bit of activity, so all of these processes are going on within our body. It's raising our heart rate and elevating our breathing frequency very slightly. So we're pushing more oxygen into the muscles, and that is going to enable these recovery processes. It encourages the cells to start working. They're pushing out any sort of waste products, getting oxygen through the body. It feels good, but what we're not doing is we're not really utilizing much energy to do it. So again, it is a recovery pace. Whereas these zones, we're very much utilizing a lot of energy. Here we're not, we're delivering oxygen without utilization. So effectively we're using mainly oxygen and a little bit of what we call free fatty acids. Zone 2, this is where we can develop aerobic capacity. And this was something that People used to do this a lot, but like I said, now it's become more about you have to do high intensity intervals, you have to go as hard as you can on the AMRAP or the EMOMs, the circuits, whatever. And for a lot of people, zone 2 has almost become forgotten about. They don't do the easy stuff. I haven't got time, so I'll just do the intervals. But developing aerobic capacity is very, very important. It means you're able to work at an aerobic level for longer, which means you're not going to delve into carbohydrate stores, glucose stores as quick as you are right now. So developing this is very, very important. It's going to help you to perform for longer in pretty much every sport that you can think of. It also helps develop muscle metabolism, in other words, how the cells within your muscles are working. Okay, it develops, so we increase mitochondria numbers, we increase capillarization, which again effectively means we can deliver more nutrients to the muscles. Should be pretty obvious that is going to help with fueling your body. So here we're utilizing free fatty acids mainly, and we need oxygen to do it. Zone 3, this is a good zone for just developing cardio health. We're getting the heart pumping, and we can also maintain it for a longer amount of time than these higher levels. So working the heart, really good for cardiovascular health, which even if you're not interested in sports performance, is obviously very crucial just for longevity reasons. But it also helps with what we call the lactate shuttle. And again, I'm not going to go too much into the biochemistry of all of this because it's like mind-blowingly complicated and big. But effectively, lactic acid is converted into lactate, and that can be reutilized as a fuel. We have this thing of like, oh, lactic acid is bad and it makes my legs hurt. Actually, lactic acid is converted into lactate, and if that can be reutilized a lot, then again, it's an extra fuel that you can use. And yes, if that builds up too much, your legs are going to start killing. So really, really important. So at that level, we're using glucose mainly, free fatty acids as well, but again, we still need oxygen for all of these biochemical processes. Into zone 4, and like I said, this is where a lot of people tend to do most of their sort of interval work and gym work. Again, very good at developing aerobic capacity, but through lactate buffering. In other words, we're able to buffer that lactate production, which is what is going to kind of slow you down. You're like, I cannot carry on anymore. So again, it increases this capacity to do work, which again, it should be pretty obvious is super important. Whether you're a boxer, an MMA fighter, a footballer, a tennis player, whatever it might be, we want to buffer that lactate for as long as possible. So again, the main fuel for that is the lactate that is produced as we work. But again, we still need oxygen. And I'm going to just take a little side note here and say, you've noticed me saying we need oxygen, we need oxygen, we need oxygen. Often we talk about the aerobic zone and the anaerobic zone. The truth is that actually we need oxygen at every single level here. So there's not really such a thing as anaerobic. It just becomes I wouldn't say less important, but it's less of a component in that particular energy system. Okay, it's just something to know. It's not just like a cut-off, shut-off, aerobic, anaerobic. Okay, finally into zone 5. This is where we develop, we term it as anaerobic capacity, but like I said, it's never totally anaerobic. And we can also develop muscle metabolism in the same way. Zone 2, zone 5, actually both really good zones for, like I said, increasing mitochondria performance and increasing capillarization, so all those capillaries delivering blood to your muscles. So again, if you have metabolic issues, if your metabolism is not working quite as we want it and using the right amount of fats and carbs at rest, and again, we can easily test this, doing zone 2 and zone 5 work is a great way to remove that limitation. All right, so in zone 5, the main fueling system is glycolysis, so using glucose that's stored in the muscles, which again is why it's only going to last for so long. But I repeat, it does still need oxygen to help that process. At the very, very top end, we're also using what we call the creatine phosphate system. So it's a very, very short duration system, as we're going to come on to in a minute, but that is also sort of typically in that sort of zone 5 work. This is my top end of performance. So very emergency based system. It's not going to keep you going for very long at all. but now you can see how we're developing the utilization of different fuels, and they're all very important at different times and particularly across different sports. So it's important to know kind of what your sport requires. So how are we actually going to train this? Well, like I said, there's a million different ways that you can actually put this together, but as a base level, I typically say 40 to 60 minutes in zone 1. You could of course do that pretty much forever, so long as you keep breathing oxygen. However, you're going to get bored, and if we're doing this as a recovery session, then obviously we often just want a bit of time out of the gym. So typically 40 to 60 minutes will be enough to get that sort of zone 1 recovery. And you can largely do that how you like. Maybe you sit on an exercise bike, maybe you go swimming, maybe you do a sort of pool recovery session where we're doing sort of high knee marches and maybe some kicks off the wall, something like that. It might just be a movement session, so even hot yoga would be something good like this, or even just like a movement circuit. Again, 101 different ways to do that, but typically 40 to 60 minutes in about 50 to 60% max heart rate. Zone 2, just put LSD, long steady duration. Again, typically we're going to want to go over 40 minutes. We could go, we could be going up to 5-6 hours depending on your sport. I say typically for the average person, again, really 40 to 60 minutes will be enough to elicit that training response and not take over your life. Zone 3 is what we call long intervals. So typically the interval is going to be over 5 minutes. Generally I like to go somewhere between sort of 5 and 10 minutes. And there will be a fairly short recovery in between that. Then medium intervals, so the interval time goes down. We're going to be looking at somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. So right now I'm actually doing this with a few clients for a rowing challenge. 1,000 meter row is going to put you nicely in that zone there. So 3 to 5 minutes, and again the rest interval is going to be slightly higher than it was here, so we can sort of get that clearance and get that recovery and repeat the intervals. And then last but not least, zone 5, short intervals, again somewhere between 30 seconds and 3 minutes, or 30 to 180 seconds. Going into that creatine phosphate zone, that will be more sort of 10 to 30 seconds, so your 100 meter runner, your 200 meter runner, maxing out. Okay, so one thing I'm just going to mention when we talk about intervals, a great way to actually do this once you've got your own training zone sorted out is not just to term it as 5 minutes here, 2.5 minutes there. It's 5 minutes in that zone. So work up to that zone, then you start the timer. So you actually get 5 minutes in the zone you want to be, not sort of 1 or 2 minutes building up. But crucially, you need to think about that in terms of recovery as well. So if I say, right, I'm going to recover for 1 minute, really I need 1 minute in this zone. Okay, it's not just a minute, oh yeah, I had a bit of a rest and I go again. Because depending how hard you're going and how good your recovery is, it might take a while to get in that recovery zone. So where some people make mistakes is to just say, right, I'll do 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. Because their recovery is not very good, then maybe only their recovery is getting them maybe into like zone 3, and then they're trying to go again. So often what we see is there's a bit of a performance drop-off. So if you're trying to train a zone through repetition, if you're trying to train a power output through repetition, if only your first and maybe second interval are at that level, and then you're dropping down, so your heart rate's up but your power's dropping, you're not actually getting the training that you thought. So, like I said, I've tried to compress that into a relatively short video. There's so much more to it, but that should give you a lot of food for thought about, well, yeah, how am I training? Why am I doing that? Am I actually getting the training I thought? Or am I just sort of working super hard and yeah, you may be developing a good or a sort of better lactate buffer, but there's so much more to your fitness that you could improve that will make you a more rounded athlete. So I hope that makes sense. As always, if you've got any questions, please get in touch with me. And if you've got any topics you want covered, then I'm happy to do a video like this. Just let me know, interact with me, make sure you like and share and do all that stuff, and make sure you subscribe.